Okay.
There's a little.
Oh, okay, great. Yep.
I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of this conference. It's my first time here, and I've been blown away by all that we know and all that we can do and all that we're going to do. And so I hope that this talk is meant to empower all of you to continue doing what you're doing with the public on your side. So now that I gave away the ending, you can leave. But this work is funded by the National Institute in Agriculture, who knew that they were so interested in sociology. And they are funding the Regional Approaches to Climate Change grant. So we slipped in this general public survey about the Pacific Northwest public as part of that. And I would be totally remiss if I didn't thank our statistical wizards, Liza McNamee-Norelli, and Monica Reyna, because J.D. Wolfhorst is the PI for the social issues, and I'm his postdoc, so we wouldn't be able to do anything without statisticians. Just to give you a brief overview of the sociology of climate change, a lot of it focuses on how the public understands science, and then we quickly arrive at, oh, the public doesn't understand science, and so there's a deficit and we need to fill it with scientific knowledge. Or they don't know this because of the media coverage of scientific issues, and we don't pay enough attention. As you can see, this was an evaluation of the media at the same time that our survey was taken. So we're fighting an uphill battle as far as media coverage. And then a lot of sociology work is done on the issue of what is the cause of climate change and how do people perceive of that. And that's sometimes a dead end issue. We focus on climate risks. There's been some wonderful talks about health here. One statistic that I'd like to point out is that 56% of Americans will experience an extreme weather event this year. And then we also focus on climate action. One of my favorite data sets is to look at social movements and image representation of how other people represent their climate risk and what they'd like to see as action. So we translate this scientific social sciences into action and education. We also use them to understand our relationship with others in the world. For example, you might think that the American public is a little bit unaware of climate change, but it turns out that in a global poll that 40% of people do not understand the terms climate change or global warming. And Horowitz, who is of the Yale Climate Change Communication Group and is like the sociologist of climate change, he calls this an at-risk term of unaware. It's missing data, they don't know, and I'll continue to use that as the frame. Okay, and then we also use it to see how the public perceives of climate change and how it ranks with other issues and how we're going to act on those politically. And it turns out that the US and other minority world countries or the developed countries, they don't see that climate change is a major issue, and that's partly because it gets lumped with the environmental issues, even though we all know that it is rather expansive and intruding in all aspects of life. And only 1/3 of the US public say that it's going to influence their voting. Okay, so how does this translate into the public? Well, we have Lazarowitz and his whole team study that many of you are probably familiar with, the 6 Americas. We have this group of elitists who get to say, I told you so, every time it has extreme weather. But I think that the bigger story is that more than half of people think that climate change is really an issue, and that this is the group that we might want to focus on, this cautious group, because in business it's easier to keep an old customer than to get a new one. And Annabella Cavallo and my former advisor Tarla Ray Peterson wrote, "A primary communication challenge lies more in mobilizing a relatively aware constituency than in persuading more people to accept the scientific consensus of climate change." So I see this whole group as our opportunity to mobilize. Okay, now for our study. We conducted a phone survey. If any of you have the opportunity to take one, please answer your phone, because it really helps. And as you'll see, this was right during an election time, so it turns out that people don't like to answer their phone that much. But once we got them on the line, they really paid attention. And Lazarewitz's study has been repeated longitudinally multiple times. Ours is just a one-time deal, but his sample size was about 1,000 for the whole country, and we focused on 1,300 people right here. So we have a very good picture of what's available. We stratified by rural and urban in order to notice those differences, and then we weighted it by some census data. So all I'm saying is that I feel that this is a very representative survey of our population in Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. Now, most of you know how to read these graphs, and I'm not trying to talk down to you, because the global models that you all work with, my data is pretty simple, really. I ask a question, I get an answer. But some of the things won't add up to 100%. And my new favorite book, everyone needs a copy of this except Amazon was sold out, is The Collapse of Western Civilization. And that quote at the bottom covers that we might want to pay attention to the things that aren't necessarily statistically significant, but we can see these relationships among the public and kind of draw the story out. We might need to recognize that if we don't get this opportunity to engage the public, then we're missing the boat. So I'm going to go through 3 hypotheses or ideas that we might have about climate change and try to explain them with our data. The first is climate change is politically polarized. First, we need to know the political profile of the Pacific Northwest, and what we see here is that our states are very interesting in that we have red states and blue states, but this moderate group is kind of representative of Idaho and some of the independents. Also, we had overall 20% of people said, I'm not part of a party. But as far as the parties being conservative to Democrat, we have our nice Keeling curve here. Okay, now to get into the climate change. I use the political view throughout because I think that's a little more representative. It includes the independents a bit better. So we asked, how has the climate changed over the past 100 years? Have temperatures increased, decreased, or stayed about the same? And you can see that if you're liberal, you're much more likely to perceive increases in temperature over the past century. But you might also notice that most people have observed these changes or think that it hasn't changed. Very few people see the temperature has decreased. Then we put them into a box. We said, okay, what is the main cause of climate change? It's either human or natural, human or natural. Well, I made the mistake of including other on there. Please specify. And it turns out that that means, here's some of the qualitative comments, some of the things we've been dealing with, our scientific arguments, some of the things we've observed, some of the things that could be causing this. I don't know why that's not human. But when we recoded it, those are kind of the anomalies. Most people believe that it's both and they couldn't choose. So again, that's that group that we might want to engage more. So Now this is the simplified chart. It doesn't have the unaware, and it has the other reduced to just those that answered both. And you can see again that those that believe in the anthropogenic nature of climate change are more likely to be liberal. This group, again, is interesting, so keep your eye on the moderates, not just the end. Okay. So we've clarified that our first assumption is true, and that climate change is politically charged in both the cause and the observation of climate change. So that's a good matchup. Second one, climate change causes concern sometimes. This is just a general frequency. Mostly people think that climate change is a concern. So more people than necessarily think it's happening think it's a concern. Then we looked at the cause versus the concern, and it turns out that the more you think that climate change is anthropogenic, the more concerned you are. So it's a package deal. Women are also more likely to be concerned. That could be an issue of the language, like there's a great paper called Cool White Dudes about why white men don't necessarily get worked up about climate change, and I think maybe this terminology is a little bit conflated. We also see that women are more likely to choose a political party of either Democrat or Republican than men are. One of the things I really wanted to capture was the geographic or scale of how people think about climate change coming around them. And we'll see from these two questions side by side that a lot of people think that that climate change will be a risk to their community and to their family. They aren't significantly different, but they're aware of that relationship to them. Now to talk a little bit about how we might frame climate change. REACH, and I have our survey and some information about REACH in my card right over here if you'd like to see more of this data. But REACH is working on continuing the sustainable growth of cereal crops in the inland Pacific Northwest, but a lot of what we're learning could be used in other areas, including how to match community involvement and the communities that are dependent upon agriculture. I also think it's a great topic because there's so much discourse about agriculture and food right now, and there's 7 cupcake reality shows. So it's a salient topic. But I also have found that the discourse around climate change is always centered in those hotspots or is often centered on those hotspots where it is at the highest risk. You know, we often think about the Arctic when we think about climate change. But there's also other risks to even our local food system. This isn't local, this is in 2012 when corn was basically burning on the stalk, and I wondered how much is this entering into the discourse. Well, it seems like people are generally aware of the effects to the food system, of the effects of climate change to the food system. When we ask about the global, it seems like most people are aware that climate change will pose a risk. And then for the Pacific Northwest in the future, we see that most people think that there will be a risk of both crop failure and food shortage, which you don't necessarily see very often that people will associate food shortage because we don't often experience them even if they are in effect globally. Okay, so assumption 2 is also true. And there's some conclusions. And just to make sure we have enough time for questions, I'll move on. So assumption 3 is that we're doing enough about climate change. We asked, do you think that each of the following groups should be doing more or less to address climate change? So we asked about state legislators, US Congress, the agricultural sector, and citizens. Just think about what you might expect, because here's what we found. Oops, is that everyone should be doing more. Very few people think that we should be doing less, and the only group that really should be doing a lot more is citizens. So I simplified this chart a little bit to just put it in perspective. 51% passes a bill, 66% vetoes anything that says, no, we shouldn't be doing more. So I think politicians should be very comfortable knowing that if I'm acting on behalf of climate change, I'm meeting my constituents' demands that we should all be doing more. I also think it's important to note that citizens didn't necessarily say, I should be doing more, but it's just a matter of convincing. So one of the things I like to think about is how can we represent this in an empowering way? Because ice caps, basically I ran out of Xanax, and I just want to think of different ways to represent climate change and to represent this unity of people and their perspectives. So here's the skeptical science graph about climate consensus among climate scientists. And obviously 97% of climate scientists believe that this is anthropogenic, and we can espouse this as much as we want, but Leiserowitz found that only 1 in 10 people in America know that fact. Okay, so then we can also represent the social movements that are happening, and there are so many beautiful images of people acting on behalf of the climate, and I'm sure some of you are in those pictures. But the idea of holding a sign in the snow at night outside a Shell station does not really motivate me to get into this political movement. But knowing that 7 out of 10 people at any given place might be interested in doing more about climate change with me is an empowering message. And I'd like to see that on every bus. And maybe that's why they're on the bus with me, is that they want to do something about climate change. So assumption 3 is false. We can do more about climate change, and the general public is interested in doing more. And communicating that message to the people in power is important too. So here's just the take-home messages. Our region is politically diverse, and climate perceptions are connected to political views. Believers in anthropogenic climate change and women are more likely to be concerned, and the public is aware of risks to family and community. People who think globally think locally as well about their agriculture, and the Pacific Northwest public wants to do more about climate change. I wanted to leave you all with some resources. I tried to find some very, well, I'll talk about our resources first. From this survey, you can get the document, and please feel free to contact me. There's a lot more in the survey than I've been able to show you right now. And there's our timeline. I'd like to share some of that information with you all and keep in contact. But there's also a wide variety of climate change communication resources that are free. These are the big ones. Yale Climate Change Communication does wonderful work. And they partner with George Mason University and have plenty of reports. And Momentous is this interesting group I didn't know about. They do a lot of marketing. It's basically the model we would be analyzing public data in order to market climate change. They have some great reports on psychological effects. And lastly, I really want to encourage us to keep a pulse on the social movements that are happening, because they're the best way to learn how people want to communicate about climate change. And this is coming up 10 days from now. And there are local events in Walla Walla, Seattle, Portland, Missoula, and Spokane. And so we can all kind of have a pulse on how the Northwest thinks that the climate march should be taking action. So thank you very much. Oh, for questions? Yeah.
Well, that I think was informative and entertaining.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious about how dramatic the breakdown was rural-urban.
We're still working on some of the rural and urban, but for the most part, those differences were not as great as I thought they would be. Similarly across state, even though there's a little bit of confounding because the states are so political, like red and blue, and then the climate is so red and blue. We're still working out that, but not as much as you think, really, on the rural-urban. Yes.
Thank you. Good presentation. Did you ask any pay for questions, cost benefit type questions? What are you willing to do for this?
We didn't really get into the willingness to pay of climate perceptions, but we looked at whether people would be willing to pay more for locally produced food, especially wheat. And I can't remember right off the top of my head, but I'm happy to get that for you. I think that people generally are supportive of agriculture, and they think that agriculture is doing things to benefit their health. So hope that helps. Yes.
I'd like to ask a follow-up to that, and that concerns the cost of energy. Energy is fossil fuels are the flip side of climate change. Are you considering, or has anybody been doing the flip side? Are you willing to stop driving less? Are you going to pay for more transit? Are you ready for the world economy to collapse?
I actually haven't found something on that. I'm sorry. But I'm sure that economists are covering that more than I am. Sorry. Yes, please.
On that question, Citizens Climate Lobby proposal has now been on the front page or in the New York Times, written by Rubin, Secretary Treasurer Bush, saying that we need to have a tax on oil, coal, and gas, gradually increasing each year at a national level, with all the money coming back to households so that it's free market friendly and it's revenue neutral, doesn't make government any bigger. If you go to Citizens Climate Lobby website, you'll find a whole bunch of materials, how to set up meetings with your local editor, how to get articles published in small town newspapers, how to meet with your member of Congress, and I recommend those materials and that information, which is very helpful with whatever angle you're working on this from. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed your presentation. Am I correct that you said more people are concerned about climate change than think it's happening? That was a nice, I heard you say that. And then the question is, am I correct that more people think we should be doing more than are concerned about climate change?
I'm trying to remember the exact number of how many people are concerned, and we've switched to the other slide, but I would say that because those questions were later, I think almost there was a persuasive path of the survey, which is a little unfortunate. We could have randomized the questions, but I think that people are very interested in climate change and they are concerned even if they don't believe it's anthropogenic. And I think that a lot of people have been working with those kinds of people that are adapting despite themselves. And I would say that our other survey on the agricultural producers is indicative of that, because so many people work within weather confines, climate confines, that they have to do something anyway, and they just think of it as normal. But I hope that answers your question. Yeah, you heard me correct, though.
And just a real quick follow-up comment. I just wanted to commend you on the work. I think there's real hunger for this. You know, I think the Yale work is great and really informative, but people acting here are really curious about what people here think about it.
Oh, okay.
But please find Leigh
Thanks
if
so
you
much.
need to afterwards.